Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon about how and why journalists and civil society organizations work together. This session is a part of the ICFJ Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting and was organized in partnership with the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University in New Jersey. My name is Eliza Applebaum, Senior Program Director at the International Center for Journalists, and I will be your moderator today. Before I introduce our panelists and we get started, just a quick note to let you know that we welcome questions from the audience. If you have a general question or you'd like to direct it to a specific member of the panel, please go ahead and type it in the chat box or in the Q&A section below, which you should see a button for at the bottom of this Zoom. And I'll read those questions aloud when we get to the Q&A time. You're also welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat so we can see where everyone is coming from today. Now I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel discussion about cross-field collaboration between journalists and civil society, based on a report published by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University in April. The report's authors defined cross-field collaboration as a partnership involving at least one journalism organization and one civil society organization in which they work together to produce content in the service of an explicit ideal or outcome, something that's very relevant for us here at ICFJ. Our panelists for this discussion are Dr. Sarah Stonbely, who received her PhD from New York University in 2015 and is now the research director at the Center for Cooperative Media in Montclair. As such, she designs, manages, and executes the research agenda, which supports the center's mission of growing and strengthening local collaborative journalism. She is also the lead researcher on this report. Pankaj Mishra is a career journalist with more than 2 decades of experience. He co-founded Factor Daily in 2016 to make sense of technology's impact on society with the depth it deserves. Pankaj is now rebuilding Factor Daily into a nonprofit media lab that goes beyond day-to-day stories for a needle-moving impact on society. And finally, Motunrayo Alaka is the executive director and CEO of the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism in Lagos, Nigeria. She has worked to expand the frontiers of social justice, democracy, and human rights in Nigeria, Africa, and beyond through the media for over 15 years. She currently leads the Collaborative Media Engagement for Development, Inclusivity, and Accountability Project, which supports media independence and accountability at the subnational levels of government with 26 media organizations. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to start with a question for Sarah, the lead researcher on the report. Can you tell us a little bit more about the research and then maybe share some of the findings?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And thank you, Eliza. Thank you, Erin, Stella, and the rest of the team at ICFJ. We're so excited to be here today. I'm thrilled to be able to have this conversation with this excellent panel. And thanks to everyone who's watching online. Yes, I would love to discuss the research. I would love to sort of set the context for the conversation. I did bring along a few slides, so maybe I'll share them now. This panel, as Eliza said, is going to be discussing cross-field collaboration. It is a newish term. Sorry, one second while I get my slides up and running. And we're going to do this. Great. I would like to give credit to my co-author, Hannah Shimashko, who could not be with us today, and direct you to the website there if you would like to see the actual report and to read more about cross-field collaboration in general. So very briefly, as Eliza said, we released this research in the spring. We were commissioned by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to look at the collaboration between journalism and civil society that we're seeing more and more of around the world. So we really tried to just get our arms around this sort of nascent trend. We looked for 2 years at collaborations happening globally. We spoke to 52 different people on both the journalism sides and the civil society sides. And we ended up defining this cross-field collaboration as a partnership involving at least one journalism organization and at least one civil society organization, usually an advocacy organization, but not always, in which they work together to produce content in service of an explicit ideal or outcome. The civil society organizations we looked at included NGOs, included civic tech groups, universities, and the partnerships are deeper than funding or using sort of a source source journalist relationship. So this is really a step above that in terms of the collaborative element of it. And with cross-border scope, often these collaborations are cross-border, sophisticated visualization elements and detailed impact plans. Some of the most important and impactful investigative journalism, as well as advocacy campaigns, are now coming out of cross-field collaborations. Sorry. In the research, we looked at 155 different cross-field collaborations. These projects were either based in or somehow involved 125 different countries on 6 continents. And the number of entities involved in these 155 projects was over 1,000. It was 1,010 entities. And increasingly, as we were doing the research, we recognized that we were really just scratching the surface. We were really happy with the breadth of our sample, but we realized that we just kept becoming aware of different projects, and we kept wanting to add them in. We had to sort of hold ourselves back and stop ourselves at a certain point. But I really do think that even though we're happy with the 155, it's a good sample to sort of make generalizations on. We thought that really we could have kept going forever because there's so many new projects cropping up every day. Really quickly, the most common topics of the projects we looked at were governance and corruption, climate and environment, and human rights, usually human rights abuses. And the 3 drivers of the cross-field collaborations that we observed, number 1, information producers, so journalism organizations, as well as civil society organizations, are no longer able to rely on sort of the usual channels for getting their content out. So by partnering either with a journalism or with a civil society organization, this content can take on different incarnations. It can have a visual element, can have a tech element, and therefore have broader reach. So that was the first driver. The second thing, the resource constraints faced by newsrooms, which I'm sure so many people watching this are more than aware of, along with the increasingly complicated nature of the stories that these projects are looking at. Requires specialized skills as well as supplemental human power. You just can't do it alone. Can't do it alone anymore. And finally, an increased desire for impact, or stated differently, less patience for no impact. So the pouring all these resources, all this time into a project, uncovering malfeasance, corruption, human rights abuses, and then seeing that project not have the impact that one would like, I think that this is one of the other main drivers of this trend. So again, just directing you to the website, and I'm going to hand it back over to Elisa.
Thank you, Sarah. So Pankaj, I know that you have talked about how working with civil society gave you insight into some new business models for journalists. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience has been like as a journalist partnering with civil society?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thrilled to be here. My first attraction was the domain expertise itself, because a lot of time as journalists, when we are focusing on a topic, we don't know everything about it. And when at Factor Daily, we decided to focus on fewer story projects, the challenge for us was to kind of gain deeper domain expertise. So for example, electronic waste is one of the first topics that we picked, and we didn't know much. Our understanding was very cosmetic. So that was the first driver for me. To partner, engage, and kind of really sit down with civil society in this case. As we kept going forward, new things kept emerging. There were challenges. The biggest challenge was, to be honest, keep making sure that the journalistic lens is intact. And everything we are being told, we are being shown, we are hearing, we are ensuring that we are dealing it with the journalistic lens, because civil society can also have its agenda many times. And while we may have a common purpose in terms of creating more awareness and getting some action on the ground, our tools are different, our processes are different. So that was the biggest challenge. The very refreshing discoveries and realizations happen on the business model side, like you mentioned. And we started looking at co-creating deep stories. And one of the stories on electronic waste, we signed up an OTT for a production deal. And what I'm now realizing is that going forward in this deal itself, civil society is a great partner because not only in terms of resourcing the story into multiple formats, and we are changing that format to create societal impact, because mainstream content helps create that kind of an impact. So we are now realizing that it's a very strong pillar. And as it shapes into one of the sustainable revenue streams for us as a nonprofit newsroom, we are beginning to look at this very seriously, and we are creating our own playbook, which hopefully we will apply in other such engagements.
Great, thank you. And Motunrayo, one of the things that that we have talked about is, the way that you want the way that you think that journalists should be changing their relationships with sources. What are some things that you've learned during your work on this topic?
Thank you very much. First, to congratulate Sarah and the team for the great work on the research. It's really exciting to see a lot of work that has gone into that, and the findings of the research are equally exciting. And for us, as a student of political science, because I read political science, it was clear to me that there needed to be a relationship between civil society and journalism. And also the struggles of my country, Nigeria, from colonialism to military rule, really gave that background of a need for activist group, civil society groups to collaborate with the media to push the front. What I saw was missing was that after we got a more sustainable democracy, the work around intentionally, now collaborating for the kind of country we wanted, we saw that there was a need to improve that. We also saw that there were gaps in the understanding of, what non-governmental organizations expect the media to be doing because of the kinds of collaboration that has gone on in the past, and what the media actually should be doing. And so I'll talk from the perspective of a model that really relates to Sarah's amazing work that I've built over 10 years, which is called RUSH, Report Until Something Happens. And it's basically built on what really should be happening. Like Pankaj said, we're talking about a huge knowledge gap on the side of the media, of journalists. There's a massive knowledge gap. We want to cover stories, but we are not always, our expertise is journalism. And then there are people who are experts in the fields that we want to cover, experts in education, experts in medicine, experts in, the extractives. And it is then important that we bridge our knowledge gaps so that we can do our work of informing the populace, educating the populace, and also entertaining the populace properly, because now we know. And so that knowledge gap is there, the knowledge gap of the subject matter. And of course, we're also thinking of issues of distribution. Now, we might publish as just a media house, but when it gets to the hand of an NGO, an advocacy group, for instance, they can take it to the streets, they can take it to communities, they can get people talking about it. When it gets to the hand of the entertainment industry, they can write a song about it, they can do a play about it. And so the information that we wish to pass can spread wider and faster because we are collaborating. And of course, there's the issue of ownership. We want because journalists don't report for themselves, we report issues. We report because we believe that reporting, yes, it informs people, but it also educates them to be able to participate better. And in many countries, civic participation is actually what expands that space for development. So the supply of good governance is a function of the demand for it. And in many countries where there is apathy and where people do not want to participate, it is also a function of what they know. And so when journalists report, these other groups of people who also have their own mechanisms of informing and educating can take up the report. Of course, the impact part is there, and it is an important thing. For us, that impact is, we have reported corruption, for instance, for many years, and I have supported, my organization has supported so many, reports and awards to journalists doing investigative reporting. But, the big numbers, a lot of trillions of dollars stolen, and so many things going wrong. Sometimes the people don't understand that. But when you partner with others, you can break it down in ways people will understand so that we can activate their participation and they can own the stories. And of course, there are also legal issues, when one journalist, like when we bring 4 or 5 journalism organizations like media houses to write a story or about a story as an organization, one of the reasons we also do it is easy to sue one journalist or sue a number of one media house. But when you're dealing with 5 media houses and 6 non-governmental organizations, it becomes more complicated for you to sue us, for doing our work. And so the protection of journalism itself lies in its capacity to be able to collaborate. I'll stop there now, and we can go on with the discussion.
Thank you. Actually, that was a great segue because you did just mention talking about impact, and that was going to be my next question. So we'll start this one with Pankaj. I think one of the things that was super interesting in the report was the way that different people kind of viewed tracking impact, especially the difference between journalism and civil society. So can you talk a little bit about, what are some lessons learned from tracking impact or trying to track impact across collaborative projects like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I want to make sure I put out is that I'm not a big believer in numbers and data. And I, in just a couple of lines, I'm saying that because I think it blinds us. And whether we talk of advertising or subscription, it blinds us because we start feeding to agendas and our metrics are, okay, so this is working, so let's do more of this. The point I'm trying to make is that the sense of purpose in at least the nonprofit media is very, very important. And once we start looking at metrics in terms of numbers, purely for measuring impact, it can be blinding. And that's my opinion. But then does it mean that we are ourselves blind in terms of knowing if we are being impactful or not? So there, I think the first purpose of nonprofit journalism is sense making. And which is why we are talking about this collaboration with civil society. No matter what we keep telling, if it is not being understood, no matter what format we are producing stuff, no matter how interactive the story is, no matter how self-fulfilling it is, if it is not translating into understanding, then it is of no use. So for me, and this is the reason why I think of sense making as the biggest measurement when it comes to understanding impact. And how do we do that? When we start, and Mutandra was making that point, and it is fascinating the way she's talking about how a story could become a song, a drama, a street play, anything, any vehicle on which the idea can ride to reach more people and to achieve this goal of sense making. For me, that's a measure of impact, which is why, for us at least, when I'm talking about looking at stories as products that could become different things. If it becomes an OTT, a series that we are working on, for example, now, it's a great impact for me because I'm reaching different languages. I'm also looking beyond English language because a lot of topics that we are talking about, people who are not on the so-called English internet could gain immensely from. but great content is not reaching them. So if we partner with the content creators, OTT and production houses, we can do that. So for us, how many stories are becoming mainstream content? How many of them are actually reaching to the grassroots in a way that they are understood? So I know it is a little deviation from just targeting the policymakers, think tanks, all those intellectual discussions that keep happening on all the topics from climate change to electronic waste, right? But for me, I prefer being niche. I prefer creating impact, even if it's small, but where it matters the most.
Excellent, thank you. Sarah, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on how much I love that, because it's something that we didn't talk about explicitly, but it was like the concept of the fact that advocacy can look very different in different contexts, right? Like I think when a lot of people think about advocacy, they think of like, going up to the steps of government and presenting a petition, or, like advocating for someone to have, some sort of consequence on some sort of official or business or something. But actually, advocacy can look very different. It can look like storytelling to an audience that would not normally see the story through, some sort of through a video, through a movie or something like that. So I just wanted to say I really love that point, and it sort of broadens the definition of advocacy in a way that I think is useful as well.
Yeah, if I can jump in.
Please.
So totally, like I said, it's an exciting session for me. I'm really excited about it, because what we're talking about is audience engagement. And, it is at the center of what can actually cause change. Like Pankaj, I talk about something I call beyond numbers. So we can have all the statistics, but where are we getting with them? And then what does the street say? Sometimes, our Bureau of Statistics will reel out numbers, and I'm like, this is different from what we see on the street. And there has to be a way to merge this, big numbers with what is happening on the street, because that is where impacts can happen. That is where change can happen. And it has to do with the fact that, there's a way that media has been constructed to be very elitist and serving to elites. And it is the very reason why there's a decline in the capacity of the media to sustain itself. Because if the people who have the mass of the people are not interested and do not understand you, then who do you sell to? If you're selling more to government and private sector, then where is the place of the independence of the media, when these are the people who pay for the work that the media does? So collaborating is actually at the heart of the sustainability that media wants to achieve, and the independence that it wants to achieve, because it gives it the power. That is why it's the mass media, but somehow it has become the elite media, the media for, just the sophisticated and the English speaking. And, there's a type of person you expect to understand media, but that's not how media work is supposed to be. It's supposed to be reaching the people, reaching the citizens. And for us in a country where, and for every country, I believe, where you really need to activate citizens' participation. And the way to do that is to ensure that, they understand what they are reading, it gets to them, and they can participate because they know.
Absolutely. And I think that all three of you kind of touched on another major issue that came up in the report a lot, which was that tension between journalism and advocacy, and how you can kind of straddle that line. And, it does bring up some interesting ethical issues for journalists, I think, but it is something that, as Sarah mentioned, as the definition of advocacy is changing, that's something that a lot of journalists are beginning to reckon with. So Sarah, did you want to maybe talk a little bit about that tension, and then anyone else can jump in as well?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. I also wanted to sort of mention in response to Moch and Rayo's point too, like this impact that you're talking about with community engagement and understanding is also the most difficult to track, right? If you're a journalism organization and this is your goal, this is your ultimate impact goal, it's much more difficult to track than, online metrics of the kind that Pankaj was just talking about, right? So I think that this is where we still have work to do as people who think about these things, right, is how do we programmatically or sort of with less friction sort of quantify that, because in the end, a lot of funders want to see that kind of impact was made. So it's kind of still something that I think is being worked out. But yes, the tension between sort of neutrality or objectivity and advocacy is real. And in the people we interviewed, it was more real for those journalists who had been trained in objectivity, who was sort of schooled in that tradition. And there was a real discomfort bordering on anxiety about partnering with civil society organizations. However, importantly, those journalists were not any less likely to join a cross-field collaboration. They were just more anxious about it. So we did see, we sort of in the report, we sort of compared the global north to the global south, and those are not sort of ideal categories in any way, but we kind of saw this pattern, and we saw that for journalists who, really wanted to remain neutral, which as so many do, they found ways to work around it. And so we talk about, again, in detail, but here I'll just say, very specific practices, which, Pankaj and Milton Rayo can speak to with more detail, but such as, being very transparent, whose role is which, and laying it out at the beginning of the project, making very clear, okay, we're going to do, this explainer part, and then, maybe on the website, there will be like a separate piece, and, or maybe the advocacy organization or the civil society organization will pick it up with the advocacy element later, and that sort of thing. So there were practices. And then there are also people at journalism organizations like Miriam Wells at Bureau for Investigative Journalism in England, who talks very sort of openly and I was going to say like sort of advocates, but sort of pushes the narrative boundary of what journalists are able to like care about in a way, right? So she's like, it would be sort of almost ridiculous to say, and I'm paraphrasing here, these are not her words, to say that we don't care about human rights, right? To say that we don't care about justice, and sort of almost saying like, let's be a little bit more honest about things we, sort of these small d democratic values that I think so many of the investigative journalists working on projects like this care about. But I would love to hear more from the people actually practicing.
Moten Rayo, you want to go ahead?
Okay. Yes, I can go ahead. So to my mind, the work of the journalist is clear, and the work of other parts of civil society are clear. And that is why in the Rush model, I explained that it is important, like Sarah says, that when a collaboration is happening, that from the beginning, we are clear about who is doing what and what we can do and what we cannot do. So to my mind, for instance, the work can start as a story. So an already published story about supplies in a hospital, for instance. A civil society organization picks that up and goes to that community. So I talk on the Rush about two major communities. There's a community of interest and there's a community of geography. And I say that where they intersect, the niche that Pankaj mentioned is where impact will be highest. So the journalist does reporting. And I always say that the journalist can be friend to many, but the journalist cannot be in bed with any. So even the advocacy groups, we can't. That is not what we do. We're journalists, so that even if an advocacy group if there's something that we need to report about an advocacy group that we've collaborated with, it is our work. It is not witch hunting. It is just, putting news out and seeking justice. But journalism is not a totally objective profession. It is biased to truth. It is biased to justice. It is biased to human rights. So those are clear as to what we do. Journalism has some advocacy in it, but no, it does not equal advocacy. So when we're organizing programs, and we are more of a journalism training and capacity development organization, we don't publish directly, but we support many organizations that do. But I always say that, our organization is not unlikely to lead, a placard carrying protest about something. The way that we protest is to report about the issues or support journalists to report about the issues. But there are some people whose work it is to go to the communities to mobilize people. That is not our work. So I think that definitely there's a tension, but the more we educate and enlighten and, you know, talk about the fact that, you know, our roles are complementary, but we are not equal to one another, the better, and, you know, the better for us. There's also the thing about tracking. In what we have found is that one of the things that people say when I talk about rush, people say, about fatigue, you know, because rush is also about follow-up journalism. We've reported an issue, we want to keep on it until the people feel change. But I'll quickly make an example of, you know, reporting the extractives, for instance, in the Niger Delta. And I think I shared the story with Sarah to say, you know, journalists have been reporting the Niger Delta for many years. And we're now finding situations where the Niger Delta of Nigeria is the region where there is oil, where, you know, most of the resources come from. And so there's a lot of pollution in the area, oil spillage, a lot of, it has affected the livelihood of the people, and the people have not been better off, you know, like the story of the blessing and the cost of, you know, having resources and having crude oil, especially. But, you know, people have been reporting it. And now when we send journalists to the field to report, we get feedback to say, you know, the people are asking us to buy them breakfast. They're asking us to pay them before they talk. And we're asking, why are you asking for this? And they are saying, you know, journalists, you've been coming to this environment for 30 years. Our lives have not changed. We're still the same. So please buy me breakfast so that when you don't do anything about this again, I'll remember that I ate breakfast. I'll remember that, oh, I was given some money, because this has no benefit to me. So how do you keep reporting when the people's lives do not change, when the people cannot see movement? So we say, yes, we have to keep following up on the issue, keep reporting it, but also we have to be able to say, on this particular project or on this particular things, and we have a lot of abandoned projects in the country, on this particular issue that we're pushing, we have been able to record success. So an example, a community in northern Nigeria that had not had power for many years, a journalist we supported wrote the story, and then the advocacy group picked up the story. So we really believe in the need for an independent driver in collaborations between journalists and other groups, you know, and so we are the independent driver. They picked up the story, and a community that had not had power supply for over 6 years, they get power supply. That is impact, and that is how we track it. It is that issue, and we can talk about who collaborated on it, where is the story, where is the community now. So those kind of niche kind of successes that you can talk about, young people, because of a song that started as a story, decide to say, oh, we are going to get voters registered, and we're going to do more. All of these kind of things, you know, there are ways that we can begin to track impact.
Thank you. Those are some really excellent examples. And I mean, it can be hard to hear sometimes, but really good points. Pankaj, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, very quickly, a couple of points I want to touch upon. One of them involved large, you know, the tussle, the tension. I would say I love that tension. Just imagine what all media has gone through. You know, brands, advertisers, subscribers, bulk subscribers, you know, all kinds of influences have been dogging us for decades, and we've been fighting all those battles. I would say this is a good battle to fight, and for that I would look at it as a healthy tension. And I would rather have this tension than mindless tension with brands and advertisers and subscribers, which actually takes me away from my core purpose. So that's number one. The second thing I want to make an observation about, you know, scale, impact, mainstream media, and so on. So again, I'm talking from my experience. So my context is India. My context are social, digital, internet intersections that I see here. So first of all, I now believe that individual creators in the social space, from YouTube's and all other platforms, are beginning to emerge as great potential partner for media. And I'm saying that because number one, a lot, at least some of them, are very focused on a particular topic or a cause. And that helps engage with such partners, because unlike mass media, which is fighting its own existential battles on one hand, and there is a race to the bottom with the daily news, these folks, individual creators, are very sharp in terms of their positioning. And I think, again, going back to the impact question, these individual creators are platforms in themselves. They have few million and tens of millions of followers and subscribers. So I think the elephant in the room is this, and if we need to brutally focus, bluntly focus on impact, then we need to engage with these new age partners. And we have started doing that, and some very encouraging results. When we did a series of stories on CSAM, the child sexual abuse material online, we partnered with a bunch of creators who cared for that topic. And we got more engagement from those individual creators than a traditional media. So I think we also need to change the playground a little in that sense. And I think that itself is a massive opportunity, at least in a country like India. The influence these creators that they have across different languages, the reach that they have, phenomenal. And a lot of them are looking to do good as well, because most of them are seen as superficial, mostly fashion gurus or things like that. And there is a craving inside some of them, at least I have discovered while talking to them, that they want to be doing good. They want to be standing with the good. And good journalism is a great bridge for them. So I think we just need to look beyond. I think we are too consumed in what we have been carrying over the decades.
If you allow me, Aliza, to just add something to that. So really, from what Pankaj just said, really even the media has, these groups already. And that's what I've been paying attention to in the last couple of years. The fact that, the media has what is called beats. So there's somebody who reports health. There are people who report education. There are people who report security. And that is the community I talk about, the community of interest. The same way there is, in as much as, we say the influencers, and sometimes in the media circle, we call them with some disdain, like they've come to take our work and they are not journalists. Yes, they are not journalists, but they have their role in society, So there's somebody who is a musician, influencer, who loves education, So there is that niche that collaboration that can happen, because you're a reporter, you love education. There is a singer who is passionate about education. There are many non-governmental organizations who are passionate about education. There are, other groups like that, community groups, parents, teachers, associations, passionate about education. And it's just saying that when they are able to collaborate, then they are going to make impact. And you are going to be telling them to do what they're interested in already anyway. And it's not necessarily always the media goes to them. Sometimes these people come to the media to say that, you have reported this issue for long. Can we help you do a debate in a secondary school about it? Because that is what we do. We organize debates and see how we will generate interest from students. So even in the media, there's the capacity to already break down into different groups and different interests and use that as a way to kind of collaborate. But what I am also saying is that when you then go to geographies, and we're talking about education in a particular community, the tendency that the passion will even be higher, because this is their environment, their children are going to that school, and the government, the local government or the regional government at that area is more reachable than the federal government. So the capacity of that collaboration to happen at that level and to gain momentum is even higher, because people are now closer knit and they are very interested in the issues.
Thank you. I'll just let everyone know that I'm going to ask another question now, and then after that, I'll leave some time for audience questions. So if you do have any, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A box or into the chat box, and I will get to those momentarily. But in the meantime, my last question, and I think all three of you have talked a little bit about this to some extent, but it's clear that in some cases, the journalists are approaching civil society, and in other cases, civil society is approaching the journalists. So this is obviously a situation in which both sides understand what can be gained by having this type of collaboration. But I guess I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what are some general best practices? Do you feel that you want to have like a formal agreement in place? Do you feel like it's more of a handshake situation? And, what are kind of some of the roles and responsibilities that are laid out beforehand? So in other words, what are the best practices for forming this kinds of collaboration? And Pankaj, I'll go ahead and start with you for this question.
I'm sure Sarah will have a much better playbook because mine is a work in progress. I have mostly field notes to share. I think clearly, articulating the purpose always helps. So in our case, for example, when we reached out, we told them very clearly that before we get to the story, we need to understand, would you be able to spend time with us over the next few weeks in workshops or whatever it takes to take us through this topic, both for child sexual abuse material and electronic waste. We did this model. So that was the first thing we told them. They said, happy to do that. We didn't even discuss any story until then. After spending around a month, we came back, had our internal discussions, we thrashed it out, and we came up with the idea of the story project. And that's the time we went back to them again and said, hey, now this is turning out to be a topic that we want to focus for the long term. This is what we would need from you. We will attribute you on our site and story project as a partner, a collaboration between us in terms of sense making around this topic. There is we don't expect any monies, and we won't give you any money. And we were very upfront in saying that. We also told them that if this becomes potentially something, let's say we sign a production deal or something, what would you, and we were very open about it, what would you like? And in both the cases, they said that is your effort. And for us, the thing would be awareness. And as long as you're attributing us, we are cool with that. And then finally, we also told them that this will be a journalistic work. So while we will rely on you for insights and understanding, we have our own journalistic independence and scrutiny. And would that be fine with you? And they said, yes, absolutely. So this is a very broad, we didn't have a contract in place, but in future, I do see encountering all kinds of folks and organizations where they can ask me, hey, what's the upside? If this becomes a movie or a book, what is in it for us? I don't have a specific answer, but I would just throw things like, this is a nonprofit media, we are a nonprofit media. If there is an IP, then yeah, why not share any outcomes from that IP with you towards the effort? Because now I have learned that in production, there are different stages. And when a project goes to production, there is a cost of production, or there's a cost of research and development of a project, a movie project. Now, that R&D budget is where you can allocate contribution to researchers. So civil society can be, a research contribution, and we can value their time in that sense, but absolutely journalistic.
Oh, just real quick, Pankaj, when we first talked, am I remembering correctly that you also did a lot of research on which civil society organization you would partner with? Like you researched them for a long time first too, right?
Yes, we did. And,
yes.
And it's very important that you bring it up, because color of money and color of insights is very important in journalism. And for us, we didn't, because again, these are long-term collaborations. You can't abort once you are in flight. So as you would do with any partner, or when you are hiring a reporter, I would say that there is nothing wrong in looking at everything through the same lens in terms of integrity, the sense of purpose, and how it is aligned with our purpose. And absolutely not questioning or judging them for their advocacy, because it's their job. But the intersection of work that we have with them, that needs to be very diligently checked.
Thank you. Sarah, did you want to add anything else in addition to that question?
Oh, no, not at all. I remember you saying that, and you said we applied the same investigative skills that we would to a story to figure out which partner to work with, which I thought was really interesting. It stuck out in my mind. I didn't know if Mochen Rayo had any thoughts on that either.
Yes, quickly. So we actually write proposals that are built for collaborative journalism. And so we budget for meetings. And at those meetings, we actually choose a subject matter. So we have done on electricity before, we have done on the education before, and we bring together investigative reporters, organizations, representatives of organizations who will participate. We'd also bring non-governmental organization, advocacy group, or media organizations that do things like shows or discussion shows and all that. We bring them together and we write them to tell them this is a collaborative work and these are your roles in the work. So we do a meeting, it's residential, we pay the bill for them to come together, and then we discuss the story together. The civil society groups that we bring together, they also have a lot of knowledge of the issue. So they share the knowledge. Sometimes we do wide stakeholders meeting, all-day meetings where we bring like 16, 20 civil society people, government, private sector people together, just talking about issues. And we tell journalists to just listen, because journalists are used to, just rush into the news and saying we know, but a lot of times we don't know. So we say just listen so that you can write nuanced stories. And then we support the story, investigative stories, and the various organizations will actually they will publish across their different platforms. So sometimes we choose dates. For instance, the electricity one, we chose the 1st of October, which was the 60th anniversary of Nigeria's independence. And we were talking about living in darkness for 60 years. And so we published first on that day. We had a calendar for publishing, and each organization published their part, but all organizations co-published. And then, the advocacy group picked it from there and started talking about it on social media, in communities, and all of that. And then we pay, we pay also, and we emphasize that, they don't become your PR, the media does not become your PR because you met at this meeting and you've worked together. But of course, there's a relationship that builds. And when there are things that people can do together, many of the friendships last longer than the collaboration. But I also suggest that we keep it within a particular time and a particular project, because people have many other things that they are doing. And even the media has, the daily breaking news that it has to do. So you don't want to get people tired and get them fatigued.
And just really quickly, I'm sure there are questions that Lisa wants to get to, but that gets to the issue of trust as well, what you just mentioned about the friendships. And we heard this from a lot of our interviews as well. Like it is so useful and beneficial to build up relationships where you trust the partner, they trust you, and you don't have to go through all that groundwork every time you want to work together, right? There doesn't have to be this whole sort of pre-reporting period where you all have to get to know each other and all this sort of thing. When you trust an organization, they're going to bring you quality information, and they know that you're going to report it fairly and accurately, then that really helps facilitate the process for the next project, right?
Yes, totally. And for us, because we don't publish, we get the trust of other media organizations to call them in the room to say, let's do this together. So we are not publishing, so we're like a mediator. Excellent.
We have 1 or 2 questions from the audience here. So Jackie R. from Minneapolis is talking about some experience that she has at the City Bureau Documenters Network. She says, I've been really curious about how we can advocate for greater government transparency without crossing a line. For example, we'd like to see the city live stream its meetings, a service it used to offer. but I'm concerned about taking specific policy stances in terms of how they figure out how to do that. Is there anyone who would like to address that? Sarah.
Well, I can just sort of maybe to broaden it out slightly, and just say, I'm sorry, can you put the question back up or repeat it? Thanks. The question of how do you partner without becoming advocates if they say something that is an advocate, if they take a position on something, I think is the general question, right? So this idea of, and this is, I think, something that you both talked about, but it seems to me, based on what what these partnerships end up looking like, yeah. So basically, right. I think, as we've said here already today, like the role of the journalist is very clear. It's very easy to say it would be a fairly neutral request to say, can you please make this be more transparent, right? Just make the information more widely available. Like I think that that's a pretty non-controversial stance for a newsroom to take, very much in line with sort of the tradition of neutrality and that sort of thing. Although, right, I mean, in various places around the world and in various contexts, simply just even putting the information out there is political. And I think that this is why I was going to say, when you asked earlier, what do the agreements look like or best practices look like? It really does vary. I mean, it's so useful to be able to generalize, and it turns out that a lot of the practices are the same or sort of take on the same flavor, but it really does vary situation to situation. And if you have a context in which even just making information public is a political stance, like a dangerous stance, then that's very different from another. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add to that.
Yeah, while I don't have all the social political context of where this question has come from, but I was just thinking about it. So number one, clearly the best advocacy for journalism is to do journalism, and that's about it, nothing beyond that. But in this case, I was actually wondering that there are a lot of roles like audience editor or communities editor and so on. I feel that some of these questions are better tackled through these roles, even if they're part of a larger media or a smaller newsroom. If there is a role like that, those folks are more equipped to tackle, and I think they have more, not freedom, but they will have more ways of finding a path for questions like these, and they will be within their rights to do, because they are not journalists in that sense. Their job is to ensure community engagement or audience engagement. So they would look at this question very differently from the way a reporter should look at it.
Thank you. We do have a hard stop at 1 p.m. DC time, so I'll just have one final question here. We've gotten a couple questions from journalists in, I see Pakistan, Burundi, and I think I saw it somewhere else, talking about closed or closing spaces. So, if there is any sort of insight that any of the three of you wanted to add about, how these kinds of collaborations can take place in slightly more difficult operating environments, anything that, and that open question to the panel, anyone who wants to jump in there.
Okay, allow me to jump in from some experience. So one of the things that we try to support is cartooning, for instance, editorial cartooning. And we found through the history of the country and up till now that, there are one group of journalists. In fact, there's debate sometimes that are they journalists, are they artists, but there are many editorial departments in journalism, in media houses, and they are journalists. We acknowledge them as journalists. We give awards, investigative journalism award to cartoonists. And we've found that it is more difficult to litigate on cartoons, for instance. So we've collaborated on freedom of expression with cartoonists before, and we did a book called Drawing the Line of freedom of expression. And then they were just a collection of cartoons. You know, they're using caricature. How do you say it's you? You know, how do you, we're not using exact name. How do you insist that we're talking about you? So we found, and I don't know if that is useful to this person, we found cartooning, for instance, a very strong tool for closed environments, because, and you can also collaborate with people outside your society doing that and talking more about it. Technology gives us a lot of leverage that we can, you know, use to go across borders to also collaborate on this. So if cartoonists from another clime or even in your country are talking more about the issue, you know, in certain, the people will get talking about it anyway, and that is what we want. People interested so much that the leaders need to be interested.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to add to that? Okay, well, in that case, I will say thank you to everyone. Thank you to the participants and attendees for your questions and for your comments. Thank you to our panelists, to Sarah, to Pankaj, and to Motunrayu for a really excellent and interesting discussion today. It was really wonderful having this panel with you, and I look forward to many more productive discussions on this topic in the future.
Thank you so much for having us, and for everyone who watched. This was great. And
Thank
to
you
our
so much.
panelists. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.